On today's Locked On Jayhawks, what are the proper expectations for Darryn Peterson when he joins KU?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. This is Locked On Jayhawks, and thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Like and subscribe to the show on our YouTube page if you could. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into how past top 10 recruits have done under Bill Self, how similar players of the recruiting ilk of Darryn Peterson and his high pedigree have done under Bill Self, what it can tell us for the expectations, what the expectations should be for Darryn Peterson as a probable one and done for KU, and is this going to start a run for KU where they're landing more of these recruits more consistently moving forward. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase at Game Time. So, Darryn Peterson committed to KU last Friday night. He is the number one guard in the class. He is a top 3 recruit in the country. In a lot of other years, he would be the number 1 recruit in the country because it is a good recruiting class. You got guys like AJ DeBonsa, Boozer twins who are in this. The one Boozer is ranked higher than the other, but really good recruiting class nonetheless. And he is seen as a kind of one of those, I hesitate to say can't miss prospect because people say that all the time about guys, and then they are like they did miss, or like it took them a little bit longer than you might have expected. So like I don't mean to go there, but point being, like as high of a probability of hitting as you could ask for from the recruiting level. Now, when you go back and look at the other top 10 recruits that Bill Self has brought into the program, I find this very interesting. So you have Josh Jackson, who was the number 1 recruit in the country. And some of these are going to depend on where you are talking about the recruiting rankings kind of coming from here for KU. But Josh Jackson, number 1 player. Andrew Wiggins were the number 1 player. You have Josh Selby, who was the number 4 player. David Paget, who was the number 5 player. Cliff Alexander, who was the number 5 player, which looking back, I kind of forgot that Cliff Alexander was actually rated higher than Sheck Diallo, despite, maybe not having as much size necessarily. But you have Xavier Henry, who's number 6. Kelly Oubre and Sheck Diallo were both 7. Julian Wright was number 8, and Quentin Grimes was number 10. Those are all of the top 10 recruits that have come in to KU under Bill Self. And so when you look at those, there's a mixed result as I was going through the names. Like if you just view it as a personal test, like I don't know, I guess we can view this as a stat thing. We can view it like if we view it as games played, for instance, right? Like if we view this as points per game, if we view this as impact on the court, if we view this as just the like yes, no test, like was this a good player for KU? Those are all going to work out different things into, would you consider it, I guess, successful or not for KU? But like if we viewed it as games started, all of those guys are games played. All of those guys played in a lot. So Wiggins, 35 starts in 35 games. Jackson, 35 and 35. Selby, 11 starts, 26 games played. Obviously had to deal with an injury, though. Paget started 19, played 31. Cliff Alexander started 6, played 28. Xavier, 36 starts. Oubre, 27 starts. Sheck Diallo, just 1. Julian Wright, 15. Quentin Grimes, 36. Then you look at the minutes per game. Right, Sheck Diallo was only 7.5 minutes per game. Every other player on that list was above 17 minutes per game. And all of the guards on that list, so you're talking Grimes, you're talking Henry, you're talking Selby, Jackson, and Wiggins, played at least 20 or more minutes per game. And outside of Josh Selby, they all played 27 or more minutes per game. So by those metrics, by those numbers, you're talking about players who played very big roles for KU, which I think will be the expectation for Darryn Peterson. Now, what makes this also interesting, though, is going back to the idea that Peterson is the number 3 recruit in the country. He's the number 1 guard. He is seen as that can't-miss guy that in a lot of other years would be the number 1 recruit in the country. Does it make sense to include him with all top 10 guys? Does it only make sense to include him with Wiggins and Jackson, because when you're looking at it by like rating, he is the highest rated recruit that KU has brought in since Josh Jackson. And before Josh Jackson, the highest rated recruit Kansas brought in was Andrew Wiggins under Bill Self. So does it make more sense, instead of comparing, what Darryn Peterson could do to what Quentin Grimes did for KU or to Xavier Henry, does it just make sense to only compare to Andrew Wiggins and Josh Jackson? And especially when you're talking about position, like, probably doesn't make sense to compare Darryn Peterson to Sheck Diallo. It's completely different positions. And I think when you look at like the Wiggins and Jackson ones specifically, when you're talking about the caliber of player that they were expected to be coming in, when you look at their game style, when you look at their positions that they play, yeah, Wiggins and Jackson more of like true wings that could play the 3 or the 4, but I think also in some sense even play the 2. With Peterson, he's more of he could be a wing, or he could play the 1, 2, or 3, but still in the standpoint of being kind of perimeter players, guard wing types. And then that player caliber where they're going to be types of players that have chances at being, I guess you could say, like All-American candidates, all Big 12 candidates, at being a top 5 pick, at being a lottery pick, at being potentially the number 1 pick in the draft. And again, it's going to be tough for, a guy like Peterson, because DeBonsa and the Boozer, I forget which one is the one that's ranked higher, but things happen. So he feels like a player to me built to come in right away and have success, score double-digit points, be an impact player on a winning team in a real way, because of how advanced he is at spot up shooting, working in the high post, in the mid-range, dribbling into and shooting, elevating over guys. And the fact that he does a lot of the dirty work too, like he has good stats with rebounding, with getting blocked shots, with getting steal numbers at the high school level. It just feels like the ready-made pack to be a day 1 starter. And I look back at Andrew Wiggins' numbers at Kansas. He was a Big 12 Rookie of the Year. He was all Big 12. He was a consensus All-American pick. Obviously left a poor taste in people's mouth with how the year finished for that team and him individually in that final game. But like, he objectively had an awesome season. If you told me Darryn Peterson's going to average 17 points, 6 rebounds on next year's team with over a steal and a block per game on 45% from the floor, 34 from 3, and 78 from the foul line, like, I'd probably just sign up for that right now, And you look at Josh Jackson's numbers, they're really good as well. The crazy thing to me is that I think Peterson, you could make an argument, comes in as the highest pedigree for shooting among those. Like, I know he only shot 31% from 3 last year, but you look at the free throw per shooting, you look at what he can potentially do in the high post. With Wiggins and Jackson, those were not like huge questions. They were ranked so highly, but those were among the questions you could have, like, how good of a shooter are these guys going to be? And Peterson actually comes in with a little bit more reputation, I guess you could say, or maybe potential, you could say, among those. I think probably more ball handling and passing than those guys. But obviously in the case of Jackson, he had that just kind of tenacity, rebounding ability, and pogo stick type athleticism. Andrew Wiggins, kind of same thing, different level athlete, like than Josh Jackson, and I don't know, maybe more graceful, even crazier athlete with Wiggins, whereas with Jackson was more of that like nasty, like dunk on you type of athlete, I guess. And so those are real things that are differences here and stuff. But point being, he is on that same level of those guys. And so I think what also has to make you feel confident about the expectations here is typically the best one and done freshman seasons that Bill Self has coached have been wings. Now, again, you can argue Darryn Peterson, is he a combo guard? Is he a lead guard? Is he a wing? I don't know. I think you could make the argument that it's all kind of very similar. Even in the case of like Joel Embiid, which you could argue he had one of the best one and done seasons for Bill Self. It was a great year, but like looking back, he wasn't starting to begin the year. And as good as he was in certain games, like the Iowa State game, he had a player who eventually went on to win an NBA MVP. He got 11 points per game. So like, how truly dominant was it? You know what I mean? But think back to some of the freshman wings. And I guess if we do want to include the guards who hit the ground running, Brandon Rush right away, Devon Dotson right away was a 12, 13 point per game scorer. Xavier Henry had a really good season that gets undersold a bit because of the team he was on, where they didn't go far in the tournament and they had Sharon and Cole, who are the first two guys you think of, but he had a really good season. Kelly Oubre from like December on had a great year for KU. Andrew Wiggins, Josh Jackson, if you want to count Ben McLemore, Johnny Furphy once he started, Grady Dick, heck, even Ochai Agbaji after ripping off the red shirt put up some big 20-point games. Christian Brown contributed in year one. Consistently, it's usually the centers who struggle as highly recruited guys to figure out Bill Self's system and all this sort of stuff, which, by the way, a quick aside, makes what Flory Badunga has looked like early in this year, I think, even more impressive, that he has kind of hit the ground running. But a lot of times the centers, maybe it takes some time under Bill Self. The guards, maybe hit or miss. You could point to guys like Quentin Grimes or MJ Rice, who it just never kind of clicked. But the wings have been the consistent one where it has worked. And wing guard types, specifically like Xavier Henry, maybe would be in the mold of what you would consider Darryn Peterson in terms of kind of positionality. And so when I look at those sorts of things, I think it gives you more confidence. So I view this as being a situation where he should be really set up for success. And then you look at the roster that would be around him to try to further his ability to have success, because that's one thing with Andrew Wiggins' season. He was counted on to be the guy, which had its benefits for Wiggins because he was able to put up those big numbers, right? If he was on a team with, we talked about this on a previous episode, like if you swapped Andrew Wiggins and Josh Jackson on their respective teams, does Josh Jackson go for 20 that year? Does Andrew Wiggins go down to 14, 15 points per game because he's with Frank Mason and, Devontae Graham, but his efficiency goes up, right? And the role is a little bit different there. And, I think with Darryn Peterson, I don't know that the expectation will be to score 17, 18 points per game. But when you look at the pieces that could be around him, you could have a senior year Rylan Griffin. So what are you looking for? Can you have shooters around him that help space the floor, that he can operate in the mid-range, that he can facilitate a little bit, that he can do some of these things and excel to his game? Well, Rylan Griffin's there, right? You could have another year AJ Storr to help be a scorer alongside him. Flory Badunga going to help cover up any defensive mistakes as a sophomore center at KU, right? If you're Darryn Peterson and you have a freshman mistake on the defensive end of the court, okay, you got that guy who can erase the shot on the inside at the other end. You could go out in the transfer portal and bring in some scoring, shooting guard who can play make with you. I think it's set up in a lot of ways with the roster, with how he is, with how past history has shown us, that I expect big things from Darryn Peterson in year one and probably his only year at Kansas. Let's get more into those expectations, what the role could possibly be, and early guess at the starting lineup for KU next season, and if this is going to start a run for KU in recruiting. This episode today is brought to you by Hims, who's changing the men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. And one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers. Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That is HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. All right, continuing on with this episode of the show. What are the expectations going to be, and what is the role going to be projected to be, starting lineup, all that sort of thing? I expect Darryn Peterson to come in right away and be a starter and somebody who's playing 30-plus minutes per game right away. Going back to those Wiggins and Jackson comps, both those guys started every game. Wiggins played 32.8 minutes per game. Jackson played 30.8 minutes per game. So I kind of look at it and I'm like, okay, I'm expecting Darryn Peterson to come in, play 28, 30, 32 minutes per game. And you look at his game, he should be able to hit the ground running. So let's say your starting lineup is this, because this would be my projection at the, way too early starting lineup in 2025 to 2026. I think transfer portal guard, right? Darryn Peterson. And whether the transfer portal guard is more of a two-man, a combo guard, a point guard, I think you just kind of go for the best guy. And you say, okay, well, we can either use Darryn Peterson more at the point, we can use him more at the two, and you just roll the ball out from there and get the best player you can in the portal. So I would say Darryn Peterson, a transfer portal guard, Ryland Griffin on the wing. At that point would be second year in the program and a senior overall. And then Flory Badunga at the 5. The other position I would have the most question about would be the 4th wing, or I guess the 2nd wing. I don't know, whatever. The 4-man, essentially. Right? I guess it doesn't matter. Like, theoretically, 1 through 4 or 2 through 4 could be very switchable here in this situation. But who would be that 5th starter, basically? I think Rakeese Passmore would be somebody I would keep an eye on there, right? So you go transfer portal guard, Peterson, Griffin, Passmore, Flory. If AJ Storr is back for another year. It's funny because AJ Storr has gotten off to a slow start, and he has another season after this one. So in theory, you would be like, oh, yeah, it feels like more likely than not that AJ Storr is back for next season. But I think the expectation probably for Storr coming into the year was ball out, go to the NBA. And so how does that work? How does it work with a guy who's been at a different school every year since his freshman year of high school, right? But would the starting lineup potentially be transfer portal guard, Peterson, Griffin, Storr, Flory, right? But either way, I like that starting lineup, right? I mean, and then you have Marco Jackson off the bench. That is a lot of potential. I don't know. Like, the question is, I'm almost assuming the transfer portal guard would be somebody who scores and shoots at a high level. So it's good shooting with that, and Griffin and Storr can shoot a little bit, and Peterson will be able to shoot a little bit. So it's good enough shooting. It would have great athleticism. I mean, if you threw out a lineup, I'm assuming the transfer portal guard probably will be pretty athletic or quick. And you have him, Peterson, Griffin, Passmore, Storr possibly, Flory Badunga, Marco Jackson off the bench. Like, if those are your top 7, maybe even a transfer wing if you lose Storr, that's like a super athletic team. Like, super. That would be one of the more athletic Bill Self teams I could remember in recent memory. I mean, Flory is certainly one of the more athletic centers that Bill Self has ever had. Marco, assuming he is healthy, is a very athletic guard. Like, that's what's going for him. Passmore is a great athlete. Like, Peterson's a solid athlete. He's a good athlete. I don't know. That could be really fun for next season. But yeah, I think the expectations for Peterson, would he be expected to be the leading scorer on that team? Again, it depends on the point guard that you bring in, or not necessarily point guard, combo guard, whatever, the transfer portal guard you bring in. Is Storr back? What does Ryland Griffin do this year? Or is he going to be more viewed as just like an ancillary piece that's hitting shots from the outside? But I think there is a real chance that Peterson does lead Kansas's team next year in scoring. At the very least, I expect him to be a starter, be playing 28, 30, 32 minutes per game and be around that lead in that category and still get you a handful of rebounds and a couple assists and do a lot of things that contribute to winning at a high level. All right, let's finish up here. Will this lead to more success on the recruiting trail for Bill Self with those elite of the elite recruits? Our episode today is brought to you by ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic that was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotic your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's how you use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep. And step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and get ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for 15% off. Our episode today is also brought to you by Game Time, which has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And you can even click on what section you want to be into. You got a lucky section, you got a favorite section, favorite place to do. Then it's even less seats that you have to go through. I'm looking right now at North Carolina seats. You can get in for $351. The upper baseline, section 22, row 15. And that is listed as an amazing deal. You can do that with the all-in pricing as well, which I have toggled on my Game Time app, which, then you're not surprised with late ticket fees. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, finishing things up here. Will this start a run? Because Bill Self is obviously consistently still, even when the NCAA stuff was happening, he was still bringing on good recruits. We mentioned Quentin Grimes, like that was a top 10 recruit. Bryce Thompson was a McDonald's All-American, right? They were still bringing on high-level recruits. And even in years where they haven't got a top 3, top 5 recruit in the country, they're typically bringing on a McDonald's All-American or two, or, at the very least bringing on a guy who's ranked 40th in the country or something like that. But maybe it prevented you from, even if you got, I don't know, maybe there was a guy you thought, even if he was ranked the 30th or 25th or 40th best guy, that you really wanted that you didn't get. But more than that is that they had been missing that elite of the elite recruit. And it's not everything. We know college basketball experience very much matters. I've always said, though, that the most ideal way to build a college roster is that, no, I don't necessarily mean from game style or like the lack of depth that this team had, or, that 2016, 2017 team for KU, because you had the veteran guard play with Frank Mason, Devontae Graham. You get some smaller guards who stay in school for a long time and end up being good players. You had a lot of veteran player to plug in that unbelievable one and done talent in Josh Jackson that added the athleticism, that added the ceiling, that added this and that to a bunch of good college players. And again, you would have wished that team had even more depth. Obviously, it didn't help that Udoka Azubuike got hurt and stuff like that. I just mean from a standpoint of, if you're choosing between, hey, you can have a veteran college roster that you add a great one and done to, or you can have a team like the 2013-14 team that is all great one and dones, I think the 16-17 one is going to be more impressive. Of course, you could have an all great experienced college roster too, and that can be great too. But the beauty of having the great experienced college roster with one and done, or maybe 2 really good one and dones, is that it is that different ceiling raiser that if both teams play their A+ game, like that can be the difference to kind of getting you over the hump. Unfortunately, KU did not play their A+ game, or maybe even B game in the Elite Eight against Oregon, and Oregon did play their A game, but we don't need to dig that back up. Anyway, point being, we haven't been able to see this in a while. It's been since Josh Jackson that KU got a recruit who was ranked in the top 5. And so that's where the difference is here, is that can they get these elite of the elite recruits? Obviously, you're at a bit of a disadvantage with not having Nike on your side, who is just like throwing out bags left and right. But, obviously it doesn't hurt when you have players in the NBA. I know that doesn't lead necessarily to exact college success, but like players do see that. And even if we can talk all day about, hey, this great, Anthony Davis, he could have gone to Vanderbilt, he still would have been what he is now in the NBA. Probably would be the case. There still are recruits who see that and go, oh, I want to be developed by, that coach, or I want to go to that school, even if it didn't matter at the end of the day. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, maybe it matters a little, maybe it matters a lot. Who's to say? It doesn't matter, because perception is everything. And so if you get another good player in the NBA with Peterson, that helps out, right? If you get another player who's drafted high, that helps out. Get the ball rolling. And I mean, who knows? You could even argue that KU has a chance to get another top tier recruit in this very class. Seems like KU is at least like in the finalists, the final 10-ish or whatever for AJ DeBonsa. Not expecting that to happen, but who knows? Nate, I don't know if it's Ament. Probably a better chance of that one happening than DeBonsa. Even if that one's not likely of happening, it's possible. But I think, point being, I'm not even saying that this is going to happen now every year, that I'm expecting KU to land a top 5 recruit every single year now. But I don't think it's going to be as uncommon as once every 8 years, like it has happened now, or maybe even once every 3 years, like it did between Wiggins and Josh Jackson. Maybe it's every other year at this point in time. Maybe it does end up becoming a thing where KU's doing it pretty much every year, or 2 out of every 3 years or something like that. Because now that they're out of the NCAA stuff, now that NIL is an important part of this, and KU basketball has a really good NIL game, now that you got the ball rolling with Darryn Peterson, I think there's a good chance that we're going to see this a lot more often than it had been happening over the previous, decade, 2 decades with Bill Self. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page We'll be back on tomorrow's show to get you an early preview of the Kansas-North Carolina game. We still got to preview the Kansas-Iowa State football game later this week as well. So plenty more action coming at you with LOJ.